Hello there! You made it! Today, we're going to ask why a global pop icon stood in front of the Booker Prize audience and talked not about music, but about the quiet miracle of translated fiction. What does a novel do for us that a stadium tour simply cannot? We're going to ask whether Homer's greatest monsters weren't fantasy at all, and whether what looked like ancient magic might actually be the oldest pharmacology textbook ever written. Christopher Nolan is circling the same material. Let's look at what he's really dealing with. Then, a historian who faced stage 4 cancer at 35, and what that taught her about the American obsession with unlimited potential. And we'll sit with one of the quietest, most devastating things the human psyche does, falling in love and then quietly dismantling it from the inside. 4 conversations, 1 morning. No screens required. If this kind of start sounds like something worth returning to, hit subscribe. It genuinely costs you nothing, and it helps us find more people who need exactly this. And if something today lands, a like tells us we're in the right room. Wherever you are, bed still warm, first coffee in hand, or already out in the world catching your breath between stops, nothing here will ask anything of your hands, just your ears. This is Perfect Days. Let's begin. Let's take a moment to come back from yesterday. Yesterday, we spent time with the idea of sensitivity, not as a flaw, but as a different kind of instrument for reading the world. We asked what it cost Steve Jobs to carry a book about Indian saints on the only device he designed for himself. We looked at why movements don't start with the loudest voice in the room. And we spent a few quiet minutes with Michael Jackson's definition of what it means to actually finish something. If any of that stayed with you, good. That's the point. These episodes aren't built to be consumed and discarded. They're built to leave a residue. Today, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to spend the morning thinking outside the box. Not as a corporate slogan, but in a very literal sense. Outside the box of your own experience. Outside the language you were born into. Outside the mythology you inherited. And outside the story your nervous system has been quietly writing about love and safety since you were small. Every segment today is, in its own way, an invitation to step briefly outside the frame you normally use to understand the world. That disorientation, that is not a problem. That is the whole mechanism.
There is a quiet, almost miraculous shift that happens in the human brain when we open a story. We spend most of our daily lives locked inside the borders of our own skin, our routines, our worries, our particular window onto the world. But fiction, at its best, is a technology for briefly stepping outside all of that. And when that fiction has been translated, born in a completely different language, landscape, and history, something even stranger happens. You realize that a heartbreak in Tokyo, or a moment of political despair in Prague, or a quiet epiphany on a balcony in Mexico City feels in its bones exactly like yours. It's easy to assume that the people at the very top of global pop culture are entirely consumed by it. We see the stadium tours, the red carpets, the billion streams. But Dua Lipa stood before the Booker Prize audience to talk about translated fiction, and in doing so, used one of the biggest megaphones in pop culture to point somewhere quiet and profound. Let's hear her perspective, and when we return, we'll carry that space forward.
While I've always felt firmly rooted, my life has never really been what you might call local. I was born in the UK, but my first language was Albanian. Woo! London is my home, but I'm often on the road. And today I have the privilege of traveling the world doing a job that I love. Last year, I played live in 33 cities in 20 countries and sang in 9 different languages. It turns out, thank you. It turns out my reading habits follow a similar pattern. Since we launched the Service 95 Book Club 3 years ago, 8 of my 33 monthly reads have been translated fiction. Just as importantly, these 33 books tell stories that span Japan, Korea, Nigeria, Colombia, the US, Mexico, Hungary, Norway, Afghanistan, Poland, Ireland, Spain, the UK, France, Vietnam, and Australia. I read as much as time allows, and while some of the books I love become book club titles, others remain private passions. I'm a reader who loves to be immersed in a novel, and I mean really deeply in it. When I read translated fiction, and some of you will recognize these scenes, I walk the streets of Naples in the shoes of a young girl who's becoming aware that her future will be defined by her gender. I've borne witness to animals taking revenge on their hunters in rural Poland, or did they? I've gained wisdom I didn't know I needed from a pigeon on a balcony in Mexico City, and as Guadalupe Natal writes, you can't get anything past a pigeon. I've overheard a conversation between French rescue responders who decided not to send help to 30 drowning asylum seekers who believed they would find sanctuary on British soil. I felt the pain of a particularly lonely love in Czechoslovakia. I've suffered heartbreak in 1960s Tokyo. I've even seen my life flash before my eyes as I faced a firing squad in Colombia. Just this year, I've met sworn virgins in Albania. I thought I knew everything about Albania. But it took a Bulgarian writer, a Bulgarian translator, a small British independent publisher, and an international prize for me to find this story. There really isn't anything quite like a book to understand the perspective of others, and translated fiction takes that even further. I guess it's the fusion of an experience that's so universal and at the same time so unique. It's the antidote to othering. When I launched my book club, it wasn't in a cozy cafe in London. It was with a reading group in Downview Women's Prison. I was there with Gabby as part of the Books Unlocked program. Each year, the Booker Prize Foundation provides free Booker-nominated books to UK prisons and young offender institutions, and that also includes titles from the international list. One of the most insightful conversations about a book I've ever had was that morning in Downview, and I'll never forget what one of the women shared with the group, that perhaps that if she'd read more books when she was younger, maybe she wouldn't be here now. That moment really brought it home to me that reading a book is often so much more than a solitary activity. It can trigger a conversation with a friend, or, like in Downview, provide a way to share a profound experience with a wider group. And a book club discussion is maybe the one occasion where you get even more out of it if you disagree. Last year's winner of the International Booker Prize was Heart Lamp, written by Banu Mushtaq and translated by Deepa Bashti. We'll have the pleasure of hearing from Deepa shortly. In her acceptance speech, Banu said, "This book was born from the belief that no story is ever small, that in the tapestry of human experience, every thread holds the weight of the whole." As a reader, I want to follow those threads of connection. What a joy it is to read. What a joy to read the world. Thank you to the International Booker Prize for giving us this gift.
She said it in a women's prison, that no story is ever small. That stays with you. We talk a lot about empathy as an abstract value, something to aspire to, something to perform. But what translated fiction actually does is something more precise and more honest than that. It hands you evidence. It says, here is the interior of a life that looks nothing like yours from the outside. And here is how it feels, from the inside, to be exactly that human. And it feels like you. That is the most effective antidote I know to the habit of looking at the world as us and them. It costs $12 and an afternoon.
Please forgive me for what I'm about to tell you. You may never be the same. We've got a problem here, 'cause you've got a hold on me. Who am I to place the blame? on you. It's the way you walk, it's the way you talk, it's the way you look at me that turns me inside out. It's the way you walk, it's the way you talk, it's the way you look at me that turns
The
me
trailers are out. Christopher Nolan is making The Odyssey. And the collective response has been appropriately electric, because we already know what he does with scale, time, and the lone human being set against a vast, indifferent universe. We can already feel the atmosphere, the weight, that particular Nolan sensation of myth pressed into flesh. We are all deeply, almost anxiously curious about how he takes this ancient journey and makes it breathe for us today. But before the cameras rolled, and thousands of years before we even had cinema, humanity already had this exact story. Homer's Odyssey is one of the foundation stones of how we tell stories at all. For centuries, we've treated it as pure, magnificent fantasy. Monsters, gods, sorceresses who could turn grown men into beasts. We read it as a dream. And then a funny thing happens when you set the poetry aside for a moment and look at the actual text through the lens of cold, modern science. What if the monsters weren't metaphors? What if the magic wasn't magic? When Circe slips something into the food of Odysseus's crew, making them forget their homeland and behave like wild animals, she sounds less like a witch and more like a master chemist. As it turns out, the Mediterranean coast is home to plants that carry compounds capable of shutting down key neurotransmitters in the human brain. Profound amnesia, hallucinations, a complete break from reality. And the mysterious herb the god Hermes provides to protect Odysseus? Modern pharmacologists actually found a plant matching that exact description, containing a compound we use today to fight memory loss and counter those very hallucinations. Our ancestors were not making things up around a campfire. They were encoding real, terrifying encounters with botany, with chemistry, with the fragility of the human mind. And they were wrapping them in the only container that could survive the centuries, the language of myth. So before Christopher Nolan shows us his vision, let's ground ourselves in what he's actually working with. Matt Kaplan, let's go.
Homer's Odyssey, one of the oldest works of Western literature, recounts the adventures of the Greek hero Odysseus during his 10-year journey home from the Trojan War. Though some parts may be based on real events, the encounters with strange monsters, terrifying giants, and powerful magicians are considered to be complete fiction. But might there be more to these myths than meets the eye? Let's look at one famous episode from the poem. In the midst of their long voyage, Odysseus and his crew find themselves on the mysterious island of Aeaea. Starving and exhausted, some of the men stumble upon a palatial home, where a stunning woman welcomes them inside for a sumptuous feast. Of course, this all turns out to be too good to be true. The woman, in fact, is the nefarious sorceress Circe, and as soon as the soldiers have eaten their fill at her table, she turns them all into animals with a wave of her wand. Fortunately, one of the men escapes, finds Odysseus, and tells him of the crew's plight. But as Odysseus rushes to save his men, he meets the messenger god Hermes, who advises him to first consume a magical herb. Odysseus follows this advice, and when he finally encounters Circe, her spells have no effect on him, allowing him to defeat her and rescue his crew. Naturally, this story of witchcraft and animal transformations was dismissed as nothing more than imagination for centuries. But in recent years, the many mentions of herbs and drugs throughout the passage have piqued the interest of scientists, leading some to suggest the myths might have been fictional expressions of real experiences. The earliest versions of Homer's text say that Circe mixed baneful drugs into the food such that the crew might utterly forget their native land. As it happens, one of the plants growing in the Mediterranean region is an innocent-sounding herb known as jimson weed, whose effects include pronounced amnesia. The plant is also loaded with compounds that disrupt a vital neurotransmitter called acetylcholine. Such disruption can cause vivid hallucinations, bizarre behaviors, and general difficulty distinguishing fantasy from reality. Just the sorts of things which might make people believe they've been turned into animals. Which also suggests that Circe was no sorceress, but in fact a chemist who knew how to use local plants to great effect. But Jimson weed is only half the story. Unlike a lot of material in the Odyssey, the text about the herb that Hermes gives to Odysseus is unusually specific. Called moly by the gods, it's described as being found in a forest glen, black at the root, and with a flower as white as milk. Like the rest of the Circe episode, moly was dismissed as fictional invention for centuries, but in 1951, Russian pharmacologist Mikhail Mashkovsky discovered that villagers in the Ural Mountains used a plant with a milk-white flower and a black root to stave off paralysis in children suffering from polio. The plant, called snowdrop, turned out to contain a compound called galantamine that prevented the disruption of the neurotransmitter acetylcholine, making it effective in treating not only polio, but other diseases such as Alzheimer's. At the 12th World Congress of Neurology, Doctors Andrea Platakis and Roger Duvasin first proposed that snowdrop was in fact the plant Hermes gave to Odysseus. Although there is not much direct evidence that people in Homer's day would have known about its anti-hallucinatory effects, we do have a passage from 4th century Greek writer Theophrastus stating that moly is used as an antidote against poisons. So, does this all mean that Odysseus, Circe, and other characters in the Odyssey were real? Not necessarily. But it does suggest that ancient stories may have more elements of truth to them than we previously thought. And, as we learn more about the world around us, we may uncover some of the same knowledge hidden within the myths and legends of ages past.
Have you ever noticed how exhausting it is to be told constantly that you can be anything? We live inside a culture absolutely obsessed with the perfect life. The optimized morning, the 5-step framework, the relentless upward arc. And it sounds generous. It sounds like faith in you. But here's what it quietly does. The moment something goes wrong, a failure, an illness, a season that simply doesn't cooperate, you don't just feel sad. You feel guilty, like you failed the test of living correctly. Kate Bowler is a historian and a professor at Duke Divinity School. She spent years studying the prosperity gospel, the American philosophy that promises if your faith is strong enough, God rewards you with health, wealth, and happiness, the ultimate self-help ideology. Then, at 35, with her career blossoming and a young family around her, she was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. The myth shattered. And what she found on the other side of it wasn't despair. It was something closer to freedom. The freedom of finally being allowed to be finite, fragile, human. Leave the pressure at the door for this one.
Americans really perfected the genre of how to build a perfect life. And it started out with religious beliefs around the power of the mind. This is like the beginning of positive thinking. The belief was that the mind was a powerhouse. Whatever you put out will then come back to you. The American belief in unlimited upward mobility, that life is, if anything, supposed to go up, really takes shape in the late 19th century. Fundamentally, this is a story about how culturally Americans adapted to city life. There is something about being very close to inequality, the very rich and the very poor, blocks away from each other, that prompts an existential question. Why them? Why not me? Americans developed this genre in self-help about how to address that inequality with stories of self-making and to explain away luck. Self-help is one of the great American contributions to literature as a formulaic set of practices and principles that people can use to try to improve their lives. But what people don't often realize is that self-help isn't just applied wisdom. It's based on a set of philosophical and religious presuppositions about what humans ought to be able to do. Why do you need luck if you have a set of steps and tools to minimize economic inequality, social inequality, and all the things that make us deeply unequal? Americans have always believed at heart that there is a solution and that they will find it. Americans on their bedside table will be reading a 5 Steps to a Better You, how to live longer, how to have a perfect family, how to improve your relationship. How to is the core of an American story of self-making. And they are rabid consumers of the very story they hope will reassure them that at the end, they will be the one to save themselves. Surprise, they're actually religious beliefs. I wrote the first history of the belief that God wants to give you health, wealth, and happiness, which is called the Prosperity Gospel. It's a story about faith, not faith as hope or belief, but faith as a power to transform their thoughts into reality. Good thoughts that can make good things happen. Everything can always get better to the person with the fortuitousness, with the determination and the positivity to survive and thrive. The great enemy of self-making and endless growth and optimization is, of course, mortality. We spend half our life probably in some state of dependence, in being ushered into this world and then often slowly and painfully ushered out of it. Most of our cultural inability to accept suffering, but mostly frailty, hides our most human qualities, that we are breakable, that almost everything good about us is actually quite fragile, that things can be given and then taken away in an instant. It takes a certain kind of existential posture to accept the world as it is. Finite, beautiful, terrible. What I really want is not that people might become very sad, but to reintroduce emotional and spiritual range. Can we be the kind of people who understand the power of despair and yet also the great beauty and sort of the infinite wisdom of each gorgeous thing we see? If we would stop convincing ourselves that our job is to solve everyone's problem, we would have richer lives. We would be more patient with the incredible variations of seasons we're going to experience in our own lives. And I think we'd have deeper relationships and witness the height and depth that we will all face as we walk the hard road.
Tonight I'm sitting here alone, scrolling through pictures on my phone. You're off in Portugal by the sea, and it's got me thinking about you and me. Tide Point sunset, cheap red wine, 2 broke kids burning borrowed time. Motorbikes parked beside the shore, dreaming about a life worth living for. There's pictures where we look so tired, holding babies, barely surviving. Coffee cold and bills stacked high, still somehow laughing through the fight. Then there's us on some foreign road, backpacks, light hearts overload. Learning life ain't places we've seen, it's you standing next to me. Funny how the years move fast, but somehow make the good things last. What a crazy ride it's been, from young hearts to raising kids. 4 little souls in a world gone wide. Blink once and 20 years fly by. Yellowstone fires under open skies, Africa sunsets and New York nights. You're leading worship Sunday mornings, Wilton Clark couch Friday nights. Every mile and every tear, every laugh through every year. If I had one life to live again, I'd still choose you.
Have you ever found yourself in that strange, agonizing space where you want something more than anything in the world, and the moment it gets close, you find a way to break it? We spend our lives looking for connection. We wait for the person who will finally see the exact corners of us that everyone else has missed and give them a safe place to land. And sometimes, we find it. The beginning is everything. Late-night conversations, shared jokes, that sudden, warm relief of not having to carry yourself alone anymore. And then, a cold draft walks into the room. They're a little too busy. A new hobby appears. When you reach out, just to ask if everything's okay, they get irritated. They pull away just enough that you can't quite stop reaching, but stay just close enough that you can't quite mourn them either. And the hardest part is, they aren't doing it maliciously. If you asked them, they would tell you they want love. They genuinely believe they do. But somewhere in the dark, unexamined corners of their history, a different script is running. Alain de Botton and the School of Life on the psychology of those who are terrified of the very thing they most want. This one's for everyone who has ever been on either side of that door.
Here is an insight that if it was properly taught to us, if there were classes in it at secondary school, could save us years, could help the economy, could make a major improvement to humankind. Instead, we keep the knowledge secret, so that in every generation, millions of people have to work their way through the painful mystery by themselves. It's as reckless as if we hid the secret of agriculture and made each new generation work out how to raise wheat by themselves. Surely the point of civilization is to share knowledge and ensure that our successors can benefit from the pain and the hard-won insight of those who came before. It works when it comes to the secrets of pottery or physics. Why would we not do the same with love? So the insight is this: if you're a little unlucky, you are liable to come across someone in your love life who will be sweet and charming and tell you with great sincerity that they want a relationship. They will be extremely affectionate and focused on you at first. They'll find nicknames and be tender towards small insecurities that others have missed. Naturally, in short order, you'll fall very in love with them. You'll start to imagine marriage in the very long term. You'll tell friends you've found the one. And then, over time, it could be 6 months or 6 years, probably not too much longer than that, something very hard to see will start to happen. Crises will emerge. They'll want to spend more time with their friends. They'll be busy at work. They'll discover a fascinating hobby. They'll grow irritable. They won't want to have sex anymore. Naturally, in such conditions, you'll reach for dialogue and imagine that this is just a momentary challenge. Let's talk about what's going on. How can we restore kindness and sweetness? You will try very hard. But the person who's been so lovely for so long won't properly engage. They may get irritable. They may deny that anything's up. They may come close again for a while, and then the negative patterns will resume. There is something that they're not telling us, something that sounds so weird as to defy the ordinary workings of our minds. They are, let's put it this way, afraid of love. They don't want a relationship that actually works, in the sense of deepens. They thought they did, but the reality is appalling. However, they don't quite grasp this about themselves. Everything is happening at an instinctive level. They don't understand why they want to cause an argument, but they do. They don't know why they're staying out again without calling us, but they are. They couldn't say why they're irritable, but they are. They have a particular psychology. It's been called usefully in some quarters avoidant. Way back as children, something happened to them. Such people are made and not born. They picked up an appalling suspicion. Other people are unsafe. Therefore, I need to be on my own. No one can own me. I need always to have an escape route. I don't want to be tied down. There's always a letdown that's going to come. And maybe, even further in the recesses of their mind, I'm a little shit. I'm ugly. No one must get to the inner sanctum. Of course, none of this is said. It isn't even really known. What should be more widely taught is the danger of such people. They truly can make us lose decades and our minds. It doesn't make ordinary sense. Ordinary sense says 2 people who like each other move ever closer and make a life of it. But the annals of depth psychology say one person who likes another may panic so that they move very subtly away without ever admitting that this is what they're doing and without even quite knowing it of themselves. What would a class on all this at secondary school advise? That if we ever meet such a person, and a quarter of the population does match this description, one must be very careful indeed not to get caught up in a web. One must give everyone a few chances to step forward and love us, and then if they don't, we must never ever stay around to do a PhD in why. 4 chances and then we're off. If we find ourselves after years in a hot and cold situation, we don't need to find out any more. Love should be, essentially, quite simple. And as soon as it gets complicated, it's a sign not of depth or romance or beauty, but of something far simpler and starker, that we are liable to have landed on a lover who is terrified of love, and therefore that we must, in very short order, to save ourselves, leave.
We covered a lot this morning. Dua Lipa reminded us that translated fiction can become a bridge between lives. We looked at Circe and realized myth was often ancient chemistry wrapped in story. Kate Bowler challenged the idea that we must always be limitless, and Alain de Botton explored how the stories we carry about love shape the way we let people in. And maybe that's the thread through all of it, self-knowledge. Because the people who examine their inner world slowly, honestly, imperfectly, don't just change how they love. They change how they live. Their friendships, their work, even the energy they bring into a room. Life is short, strange, and constantly surprising. What we do here in these quiet mornings is practice, becoming a little more present, a little more curious, and a little more open to ourselves and to the world. That's enough for today. Come back tomorrow.